Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. This session is called Seeking Solutions, Improving the Application of Earth Science Data for Community Resilience. Next slide. And I'm Arika Virapongzi. I'm from Middle Path Eco Solutions. It's a consulting firm that works with community building. I'm also from the Ronan Institute for Independent Scholarship. Jonathan Blythe is from the Department of Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Ruth Doerr is from the Ronan Institute. Zachary Robbins is a doctoral candidate at North Carolina State. He's also a previous ESIP Community Fellow. Rupu Gupta is from Knology, which is a nonprofit social science research organization. And Christine Gregg is a master's student at University of Michigan with a background in environmental remediation. And she is a current community fellow. And so this is the team from the Community Resilience Cluster who's been working on this session as well as some of the things that we'll talk about in this session. Next slide. So the objective of our cluster at ESIP is to enhance community resilience through culturally meaningful improvements to data accessibility and informatics tools. Next slide. And so what we aim to do here and why we decided to pull this cluster together, the cluster's been around for at least a couple of years, and we recognize that there is a gap between earth science data and the community resilience as a practice. And so we'd like to improve the connections between those two things. And also we'd like to define transdisciplinary knowledge frameworks to help scientists and practitioners work together in ways that are transformative, and also in a way that helps community resilience. And then lastly, we'd like to explore the role of data in advancing equitable community resilience efforts. Next slide. So what we've been doing for at least the past year is we've been working on a problem statement for our cluster. And we chose to do this because we felt like oftentimes it's the easy thing to do is to jump towards solutions and start inventing cool stuff or cool solutions to problems, but without having a really good understanding of the problem and the root causes of those problems, that doesn't really help us, help with the problem. So, what we've done is we've recognized that we're starting off this premise that historically earth science data has been made by and for scientists. And I think most of us here in this room probably understand why that is. And I think ESIP is a great example of that, because ESIP as a community was created as part of a NASA initiative to help support the Earth observing system. And so now, today, as things have evolved, as technology has evolved, and society has become a lot more connected, society now expects more access to and value from that data and information. And that is a good thing, because I think it tells us that society wants to be involved in making decisions and knowing how to have a voice in our environment and the earth that we live in. And so I think we can all probably agree that earth science has a lot of potential to offer societal benefit by contributing to the resilience of communities, but there's still some challenges that must be overcome, and that's what we are trying to work on. And we think about resilience as helping to guide communities' decision-making to improve livelihoods, address environmental change, and to cope with hazards, risks, and disasters. And there's a short link here for the problem statement, if someone could pop that in the chat. And it's a pretty long document that we're working on. Next slide, please. So we ask in our problem statement, how can earth science data be utilized more effectively to enhance community resilience? Next slide. So the goal of this session is we would like to review the challenges that are outlined in our problem statement. There are things that we've come up with through lots of discussion. And then what we're working on is identifying, we're not going to move into the next phase of identifying recommendations for those challenges. But first of all, we'd like to have your input and your help on whether or not, have we gotten these challenges right? Are we missing something? So what we're going to do in this session is we're going to introduce the challenges as we've thought about them, and present those to you. And then we'll have some small breakout sessions to discuss and share feedback and share insights. Yeah. And overall, just think about brainstorming about how data can support community resilience efforts. And I think this is also really relevant. I was listening to the plenary sessions today and thinking about innovation and thinking about you know, the role, what role we have as a community, as the earth science data community, in all of these societal issues that we're dealing with. I think that really made me think about, you know, what we're trying to also achieve in this cluster. Next slide. So Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead a couple of breakout, or at least one breakout group.
Yeah, thanks, Rika. So before we dive into the challenges facing community resilience, we want to give everybody a few moments to just reflect on our problem statement and make sense of it. So in groups of about 3 to 4 people, you'll have about 7 minutes to reflect on these questions and just see how you can relate it to our problem statement. So these questions are very broad. You might find it helpful to frame your responses just around the communities that you identified in the chat at the beginning of the session. So Megan, I believe, is going to be setting up our breakout rooms. And while she does that, yeah, thanks. So Zachary has the questions in the chat. These questions and some space for note taking are also at the last page of our Google Notes doc in Sketch. So feel free to take notes there as well. You don't have to take notes, but we would love to see your thoughts.
I think we're ready to go. Just let me know when you want me to hit start.
Yep, we're good to go. All right, well, it looks like people are filtering back in from their breakout rooms. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so I think we have enough time that if somebody was maybe cut off in the middle of a thought that they would really love to share, you can feel free to unmute and continue the discussion here. You can also add your thoughts into the Zoom chat or into the Google Doc. So if anyone has anything to say, feel free to take the spotlight. All right. And if not, I'm going to pass it back over to Arika, and she's going to continue talking about challenges.
Great. Thank you, Christine. I'll say that we had a great discussion in our little breakout room for the short amount of time that we have had, and it was nice to get to know other people, new people in ESIP. And one interesting thing we did talk about was, I think this also relates to the plenary, about the role of potentially local communities being more involved in this science and collecting data, and in being more connected to the community that they're in, and learning about it as well. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to jump into the challenges. So we're going to have little short presentations about each of these sections. So these are the sections that we have focused on. I'm just lingering a little bit so you guys can just take a look and just read those 4 of them. Jonathan, go for it.
All right, so next slide, please. I will cover the first breakout group, and we'll be focusing on inequity in the scientific process. Inequity refers to underrepresented groups, gender, race, or culture. There may be other kinds of disparities, socioeconomic, political disparities that are embedded in the scientific process. So this is basically who is involved in conducting science. And it's been well documented that there are these, or historically have been these inequities, although it's getting better all the time. There's also another flip side to the coin. We're really concerned about inequity and the benefits sharing from science. So science is a public good, but it's not shared equally by all sectors or these groups in society, all communities. So why is that? That's really a problem that should be concerning to all scientists, and the scientific process and structural problems that may be prohibiting that. So there are a lot of reasons that it could be, but whereas inequity is concerned, we really take a note from another cluster, the community data cluster, who have been looking at this Flint, Michigan drinking water crisis as their use case. And I think this is an example where inequity, as the way we represent it here, is a major factor. And for those of you who may not have been involved in that cluster's activities in the past or haven't heard about it, really what happened was there was a reversal after Flint, Michigan changed their drinking water source. There were problems in the government agencies at the local, state, and federal level responded in the way that they could and knew how. But still lingering after the fact, when we looked at it this summer in in their session, the community data session, there was really a lack of information on the web about the issue, the scientific basis for the problems, still continuing today. And so I'll just give a shout out to community data. They're going to continue working on this. They have a session later this week. But we're also taking note because this is a good use case for the inequities challenge. Really, we need to understand this better. What's prohibiting the dissemination of data to communities who need it? Is it something about the scientific process? It's maybe the rigidity and how knowledge is shared and disseminated that we need to tackle through this problem statement. So next in our array of challenges, Ruth Dewar is going to cover the next problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. Thanks. But first, I want to acknowledge that I'm actually sitting on land that has Arapaho, Ute, Cheyenne, and Ocheti Shakoween inhabitants historically and today as well. So I'm talking about data ethics and governments. And as many of you know, indigenous communities in some parts of the world have developed the CARE principles: collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. All of these sound like principles that any community might desire. So what rights to data should any community have? Does this include the right to design restrictions on data collection and use? And how does cultural identity align with responsibilities for things like collecting, maintaining, or protecting data? Similarly, there are all sorts of issues around bias and misuse of data. For example, how do you detect or prevent biases in data collection? How do you prevent inappropriate reuse due to either analyses that are uninformed of the context in which the data was originally taken, or which are cherry-picked or otherwise selectively analyzed? You may consider this to be the Fox Not Really News problem. Alternately, what can communities do about data collected about them that they can't control? How do they prevent it being used against them? In the case of the Atlas of Community-Based Monitoring, Inuit Mental Health and Wellness, depicted on the left, actually right of the screen, you can see that much of the data is not publicly available, even though the Atlas itself does not hold personally identifying information in the legal sense. That's one example of a case where data is being selectively managed by the communities that are that it involves. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Zach.
Thank you, Ruth. Another problem that community resilience efforts can have when dealing with earth science data is a mismatch of scale and focus. Communities can be organized at various different scales, from groups of individuals to regions like the Gulf Coast, and each one of those is going to have its own specific data needs. In earth science, we're most often concerned with the scale relevant to a phenomenon we're interested in studying. And a lot of times there's not the additional funding or the additional research to be able to take that to a different scale. And so the data is sort of stuck within its native scale. Slide. And therefore, resolution can be kind of a limiting agent for the ability to use data in a community resilience context. As we all probably know, earth science data is often very coarse resolutions or can be very fine scale resolutions, and it needs to be interpolated or downscaled to be really used in a community resilience context. Additionally, studies have shown that if this data is used in its native form and not properly downscaled, the effect might be of a different magnitude or even of a different direction. And that means using this data in a community resilience context could be very difficult or even deleterious ultimately. There's also a problem of where we focus our attention to. We often want to look at scales that are very near term, like weather, or long term, like a big effect across the next century. But often we may miss the scales that community planners really need, which may not be accurate, 8 to 10 years out into the future. Next slide. And then ultimately what that's going to result in is different trade-offs. Community resilience will have spatial and temporal trade-offs. And so if we only have data that's available at really coarse scales, our decisions we're going to make reflect that. Might make decisions that are best for nations, but when it comes to smaller communities, they're going to need data that reflects their situation in order to be able to advocate on their behalf. And if we don't do that, our planning effort is going to be biased against them. Next slide. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rupu.
Thanks, Zach. So I'm going to be talking about the fourth challenge, which is data needs of users. And the lens through which data needs has typically been studied is through data literacy. And data literacy has often been defined in several different ways, but there is limited attention to what this concept means for a community. Meaning we know little about what motivates community residents to want or not want to access data. For example, data literacy may look different for specific members of the community. Some may want data to make sense of and tell stories with data. Others may need skills to interpret data, and yet others may take on the role of scientists. And so they would need more technical skills, more advanced data. So this nuanced understanding of data needs among community members is currently missing. And partly this is related to another challenge in this realm, that historically there's limited interaction between scientists and decision makers and community members. So as a result, a deeper understanding of a community's priorities and worldviews related to their data needs is lacking. Next slide, please. Then when we're thinking about application of earth science data for problem solving, it is often conceptualized as a data, information, knowledge, and wisdom pathway. And the climate change discourse actually offers a pretty good example of this, where earth scientists observe trends and they compile data to describe climate change patterns. Then that technical information about climate change is shared far and wide. And then knowledge of climate change grows across disciplines and into the public. And finally, climate change then becomes central to decision making and applications when we're thinking about societal and environmental benefit. The problem is this process is typically conceived of as a linear mechanism, which leads with data and information. And what this overlooks in the process is the complexity and nuance in how the public is engaged in the process. And in this scenario, the public are typically considered as passive recipients. In reality, however, some scholars talk about earth science data, the pathway, as more of a network system, because this framing helps us really account for the many different products that stem from data and the people who may be playing multiple roles along that network. So currently the exchange within the various aspects of this DIKW pathway is not really understood, neglecting the interactions between scientists, community members, and addressing their specific needs. So with that, this is the end of our brief presentations for the challenges that our cluster sees in applying earth science data to a community resilience context. So now it's your turn, and we want to hear from all of you about what you thought about our challenges and your feedback and opinions about them. So how this is going to work is you will choose which of the 4 challenges you heard about you want to discuss more. And we'll be sharing with you a number for each of these 4 challenges. If somebody could just put it into the chat. Actually, I'm looking for the number 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of the challenges so folks can choose one. There we go. So if you look into the chat, each of the 4 challenges have been assigned a number. And so what we would like you to do is choose whichever number you want to discuss and then change your profile name indicating that. So by renaming yourself. So for example, I just changed mine to 4 because that's the one I just led, and as our other cluster members. So if you could do that, all of you indicating which challenge you want to discuss more, we will use that and assign you into a room to get into that deeper discussion. We will have 15 minutes for the discussion where you'll have a set of discussion questions which we posed here, but you'll also have with you in a Google Doc where you can take notes while you are discussing your opinions. And Christina just shared the comment board where you can provide your comments. So has everyone indicated their preference?
How do you do that?
So
I don't know. I don't know how to change my.
Sure. If you go to your profile picture on the top right, there are these 3 dots. If you click on the dot.
Is this in Zoom?
In Zoom.
Okay.
Some of us have to use the browser version and we don't have that. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it looks like we do. Sorry about that.
Yep. And
yes,
there's a rename
okay.
option. There's a rename option. All you have to do is show one of the numbers.
And if you're lost, I'll just I'll talk to those of you who are still here at the after everyone else goes into their rooms. Seems like there are just like 6 people who have yet to put their numbers.
I can't find my profile
No,
thing
that's
to
okay. I'll help
change.
you.
So I'm Jackie Kendall, J Kendall. I'd like to be in room 4. If you could put me
I'm
there.
on it.
Thank you.
Great. Great. Excellent.
Great. All right. The rooms, I'm going to go ahead and open them. It was 15 minutes, correct?
Yes, it's 15 minutes. And you'll have the option to choose to continue to stay in the same room or go to another one after 15 minutes, but the session leads will direct that process. But enjoy your conversations, everyone. See some of you in group 4.
Just a moment. All right, Dawn, where would you like to be? Or Maggie, where would you like to be? Or Christina, where would you like to be?
I'm happy to go where.
So everyone's coming back here, correct?
Yep.
So we have another 15-minute small group breakout. If folks want to continue the conversation in their previous groups, we can just go back to those groups. Or if you want to change the number and indicate you want to go to another group, that is also possible. I know my group about data needs for users was in the middle of some really interesting conversations. So I would love to continue that. But why don't we take one
suggestion?
Yes.
I'm just going to make it so that you can choose any room you want. So I think by default, you're in the room you were just in, but you all should see. Well, I think if I open the rooms, you should see something at the bottom of the screen that lets you choose. And if you don't see that, just tell me and I'll help you.
Right, and just for a roadmap, after this last breakout, Ruth is going to do a really cool interactive game. So please stick around and give us, participate in this feedback process that she's worked hard to provide for us.
Yay, looks like we've managed to retain most everyone, which is great. I'm sure everyone's been having really insightful conversations and this could go on for a while, but we wanted to bring the group back. Yeah, I think we have a little bit more time than we had anticipated. So we may want to take this time to just do a short report out from each of the groups. I can start very briefly thinking about what we discussed for the data user data needs for users group. A bunch of different things were discussed. I think what was most notable to me was the emphasis on the different kinds of data and being very mindful about even within the scientific community that there are different users. For example, in education, students with different disciplinary emphasis might have specific skills in using data that have like social connotations versus some others, but then also thinking about, so that's education. When we're thinking about more in scientific organizations, there are researchers and also operational workers who might need different skills to really bridge the divide they have in the kinds of data they're using. So that was really insightful on my end. And then we spoke about the issue of scale of data use and how machine learning might be a really appropriate way to think about, how to scale things up from a localized base to more broader impacts. Can I invite group 3 to share their thoughts?
Yeah, would anyone like to share who's not me? Just put that out there before I do it.
You'll
Okay.
do a great job.
What's that?
You'll do a great job.
Okay. Yeah, we had a lot of different things to cover. We kind of first talked about the data itself, different ways and examples people had of attempting to use sort of coarse scalar science data and where it kind of was failing people and they kind of had to take it into their own hands in order to create the data that they needed. And then additionally, we kind of talked at how research originates, and kind of the structure around funding and the interaction with communities. We spent a lot of time talking about what a community is. And one of the problems, obviously, with scale is that there are so many different types of communities. For one given researcher to attempt to address all the different communities, could take them the rest of their lives. And so another thing we sort of talked about in that regard was what either through funding or through connections with different people could create the type of research long-term that's really going to address the most communities possible and be available in a way that a lot of those communities could access. Do I have anything else here? We talked a little bit about ESIP and ESIP's location, having all these different conferences, Are we doing enough as ESIP at kind of being like, well, we're moving all around this country and world. Are we connecting with those communities more directly and hearing what they need, That's just kind of the scale of a organization like ESIP. Then we also talked about time scales, We have these short research projects often when community planning really is a ongoing process that takes such a long period of time. Can we fund things that are really long term? And then other people were like, no, kind of more how we should structure it is really looking at You know, can you put out deliverables immediately that benefit the community, and then your funding might get, you know, re-upped? Then just kind of teasing out different ways that we might structure research in the future that would be kind of community serving first, or at least have a real concrete and explicit plan of how research is going to serve a community. That I'll pass on to group 2.
Ruth, if you're not ready, I'll go. Okay. I'll go. Okay, so group 1, a quick report out. We had a small group, but I think it was very senior people I respect greatly. So I appreciate the interaction. Early on, there was the use case for Flint, Michigan really came in handy to kind of spark the conversation. And in that case, it appears to be more of a knowledge challenge, because there was knowledge early on, even before the decision was made, that this could be an issue with corrosiveness of water and lead in pipes. And so, you know, for whatever reason, that knowledge hadn't been shared in a way that was anticipating the problems. And the insight we received, and I'll only point out 2, Steve Young really pointed out the process of listening. So maybe as in our sciences, when we're interacting with communities, are we really receptive to listen to them and what they're noticing? And in the case of the Flint, Michigan crisis, the water was brown and people were concerned about it, but it just took so long for that to be addressed in a scientific way. So not that could have avoided the problem in the first place, but listening would have been part of the solution, and eventually was. And finally, Bruce Karen made an excellent point about ESIP and how every day ESIP is doing the kinds of things and listening and looking at these problems in new and creative ways from different perspectives. So ESIP seems to be a place where we can do this. We can really address these challenges. And so I'm really heartened by that. I think we should take that up as a charge and see how we can implement that, if you will, in a systematic way for ESIP.
Okay, so Jonathan, you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Ruth, your turn. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I was actually speaking on mute for about 1.5 minutes there. Nobody noticed. But anyway, so in the ethics and governance group, it was a smallish group, but we had some good discussions. We came to the conclusion that the CARE principles are probably not as widely known as they need to be. And also that they should be promoted beyond Indigenous peoples, because actually using data to be of collective benefit, responsibility and using data, et cetera, are all things that, you know, basically all communities, you know, should have. That there's probably a need to figure out what scientists and researchers need to know about ethical data sharing, especially in cases where humans aren't directly involved. And there's the question of, so, you know, there may be cultural expectations around data. For example, the Indigenous communities have a set of badges that that kind of tell you what who should have access to these data. You know, is this data that really should not go outside the community? Is this data that only women should have, or only men, or only a particular family, et cetera? And these are things that, for example, repositories can put on data, but these are only indigenous metadata badges. And so there's a question of what does metadata around ethical considerations look like? I don't know that there's any standards for that. And the real question, of course, is, so how do you undo the mistakes of the past? And there was a general consideration that ethics, data ethics and governance is really an ESIP-wide thing, and it should be perhaps broadened outside of the scope of the community resilience cluster, and that should be an important topic for ESIP to address separately. And last but not least is the sense that ethics and governance is important for ESIP, but that there's a fear of that basically we're already maxed out. We don't have we have limited bandwidth to take on anything more. So, and I guess the last thing I would like to note is that there were some stories told, and the general consensus seemed to be that sharing those kinds of stories was a good thing to do and needed to have happen more often. So, and that's pretty much it.
Cool. Thanks everyone for sharing. Sounds like we learned a lot as a group. And with that, actually, Ruth, you should continue as we pivot into the next portion of our session.
Okay, well, whomever's doing the technical part, bring up the link on that slide at the bottom of the slide. So everybody, there's 2 questions that we're asking you. And if you go to this place, can somebody put that in the chat? I can't even find the chat there. Thank you, Zach. And I don't see our screen. Oh, there it goes. Yay. So as you go to the Mentimeter slide and enter your answer to this question, how should we engage with ESIP to achieve our goals? You'll start to see answers pop up here. And we're going to hang out here while you guys think about what your answers are and start adding them. So if you have anything to say, they will be anonymous. But there are, I think, about 16 unique participants that aren't co-hosts. So how should this cluster engage with ESIP to achieve our goals of defining the challenges and then figuring out what ESIP can do about them? We have a bunch of very shy people.
Ruth, I've submitted a couple things.
And they haven't shown up?
I thought maybe it was a lag, but maybe no one else is able to either.
Oh, there you go. That's better. I don't know why it's not coming in live, because normally it will. So you might have to refresh.
I put in a response, but it's not, it doesn't seem to be showing up.
Okay.
Me too. I got an error message that made it sound like maybe that fiber optic outage is impacting something. Didn't seem to be working right.
What a bummer. It does look like, though, if she refreshes, things are showing up. All right, we have 12.
Maybe an imperfect tool, but this is great feedback. Thank you.
That's true. And I don't know why it's not working today, but it might have something to do with the outage that apparently we're having in the northeastern half of the country.
There, I think we got 15, so we can.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. And this is going to create a word cloud. So enter 3 or more words. You're allowed to enter multiple times. And we just thought it would be kind of cool to see what a word cloud came out of this.
My Mentimeter says that the slide's not changed, so I don't see, I can't enter anything.
Okay.
Same here.
Really? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Not.
Ruth, you need to advance those on your end. I'm just showing the results.
Right. And I had it up, and now, of course, it's gone. I can't find it. Ah, here it is. You should be able to access it now.
I got it.
Yay! How come everything works so much better in practice than it does in real life?
Because why else would we practice then?
It's supposed to make it better, not worse. Aha. Entertain. Communicate. Listen. Speak to stakeholders. Sell. Defer to communities. Change funders. Agencies. That's a good one. Well, I'd say collaborate seems to be the winner. Very cool. Develop best practices. Wow, quite a bit here. Cool, guys.
Are you going to share these results, Ruth? I think that this is all the jargon I need for my next proposal.
Ruth, would you like me to put this in the chat, this link?
You can put the link in the chat, but actually I was planning on adding all the data to our notes document. So.
Oh, okay. Well.
Because yeah, I can get it as a spreadsheet is basically the way I can do it. So that's what I was planning on doing, is just cutting and pasting it into our notes document.
Screenshots. I love that word cloud.
Cool. All right. And I guess I'm passing it back to Rupu, or
to me.
To Erika. Okay.
Yeah. All right, great. So we're just going to close here in our last minute. This is, again, the short link to our problem statement. If Zachary, if you can just pop that in the chat again. You'll find it also on the meeting description, but any comments, we are very happy to receive them. We hope to complete this problem statement this year, and we will definitely let the ESIP community know. We welcome everybody to join us in our conversations in the cluster. You can find that information online. Obviously, we meet every third Wednesday at 4 p.m. ET, and we also are pretty active on our Slack. That's the way that we communicate together. So if you ever just want to, put up an interesting article or communicate with us, we'd love to hear from you. Next slide. And so with that, I'm just going to close this session. I want to thank all of my teammates, everybody who has been helping on this session, the ESIP organizers. Thank you so much for making this possible. And to all of the participants, your feedback has been wonderful, and I can't wait to go and see some of that Mentimeter input. So thank you all and have a wonderful conference.